I'm here in, I think, this might be Northbrook, and this is the old Mariano's, and I don't know. This could be multiple laboratories, yes, like Quest Laboratory and all that, because right across from it, you have multiple pharmaceutical firms. And this could be a drug testing facility. It could open up a Red Cross, blood donation, or life source. So lab testing with blood donation. And the funny thing is, you can get tested before you donate blood. So if you pair up a lab testing facility with Red Cross, now they have the spectrometers and that, and the new ones, and they can do the analysis in, say, 30 minutes right there on site before they even take the blood. So they come and they get a full blood spectrum analysis, and in turn, the Red Cross decides if they want the blood. And it could be they have, say, syphilis, and they have a buyer for syphilis blood. That's what the Red Cross didn't think about, or Life Source, is that all these laboratories are looking for these different types of diseases, and including diabetic blood, because they need to test in the blood the diabetic medication and how it affects the sugars in the blood, but they have to preserve the blood. See, being able to do this and sell it off, you have to be able to cryogenically or dehydrate the blood and preserve it, and you have to take a ratio of the plasma in the blood, the liquid, and figure out how much water it is by taking a sample and then dehydrating it, and then storing it in cold temperatures so later it can be rehydrated. So again, it's right there, and it can pair up with, if my ex was still Jennifer Kim, with this Japanese pharmaceutical firm. But they can also test how Asians, like Japanese, like my partner David, he's third generation Japanese. Now his kids are mixed because they're Malaysian Chinese. So Matt and Megan. But again, they can test how David is a third generation Japanese, how he's fared in America in the environment and dietary habits, and look at how his genetic structure handled the environmental change. This goes into immigration policy, and the federal government can fund the research, but we're not supposed to bring people into our environments that the environment destroys them. There's a higher criteria now. And so immigration needs to get incredibly sophisticated. Just because we need them, we might not be able to take them because they don't fit for the environment. Now, if it's a short stay, say it's a 6 months to a year engagement, then they could handle it. More than likely could handle a 6 months to a year engagement, unless they have some type of extreme allergies or some type of an extreme environmental sensitivity. Extreme environmental sensitivity. And if they don't have that extreme environmental sensitivity, then they can do a short-term engagement. And so they can come in for 6 months or to a year, and work. But somebody who's coming in longer, like a student, if they're not doing a semester over abroad, truly, and when you're doing this, say a semester abroad, you have to see diseases that can conquer your immune system quickly. So it depends on how healthy you are when you leave the country. See, if you're sickly and you're older people, and this is a problem with having older people like in Japan, you have a lot of centenarians, but it's not the golden years because traveling makes them very vulnerable. And so you have a lot of older people and they can't move around because they're too environmentally sensitive. And so longevity brings other types of problems and serious fucking issues. So you don't understand that. So what's going to happen is, for them to be able, you're going to have them very well, strong immune systems. And you have to deny people the ability to travel based on immune system strength. Truly, we can't let foreign workers go abroad into particular environments if they don't have robust immune systems. It's like letting them go up into space and they have diabetes and other things. Like for space tourism, even short exposures, depending on their sensitivity, could be very devastating. Why do you think astronauts go such a rigorous standard? And when I saw a few of them they showed, that's not any astronaut I know. Those astronauts came from military programs, Jim Lovell and all them, that were incredibly fit. Not only were they the best of the best pilots and what they did, but you can't send a scientist up there unless they're a fitness addict. The scientists, unlike before, you can't send them up there or allow any foreign scientists to come in unless they meet certain physical standards, both mentally and physically. You have to do tests, both psychological stress tests and physical stress tests, to see if you can allow them on the space station. Because what happens? They go up there, they get sick, and then they come down and they contaminate their family, their friends, their community. And remember, there are things going on like neutrinos and everything else that you have less shielding. And so they're exposed to a whole different atmosphere. And we have to test things like in the airlock. When they open the airlock, do you know there's space dust? And I proved that there's an incredible amount of small particles in every ounce of space. You know how many galaxies have gone supernova? Do you know how much space dust there is? It's everywhere. So when you say it's a vacuum, it doesn't mean it doesn't include, it means these particles are moving through without an atmosphere. All a vacuum means is there's no atmosphere. So that means a particle in motion stays in motion unless acted upon. How does it act upon? Particles collide with each other and they change course. And so they interact with each other and you change course. That's why I told you, the first mover, that these things have infinite space, and one day, and it's truly one day, this gas cloud met this gas cloud, and the likelihood of that happening, if you understand there's infinite space, is rare. So when you do the pocket universe theory, you have to understand you have to take infinite space. And to get these big plumes of matter that interact to create a universe is unbelievably rare. Unbelievably rare. Not a regular thing. Because there is so much space that they just wander aimlessly forever without interacting. Now, it's different on a smaller level when we get on to dust particles and that. Yeah, they interact all the time. There's so many of them that they interact. And sometimes, because of exchanging of electrons and that, they connect to each other and build up. And they'll interact with other dust particles and so on, and eventually become bigger and bigger as they accumulate particles that end up attaching themselves. So as they move through, a little speck can turn into a planet in size. So again, we call them asteroids or meteorites and that. But again, these things move through space, and sometimes they're discharged, and they are, but other times they just interact with enough of certain particles and they accumulate, creating a mass from literally a speck of dust. And those things are so old, you're not talking things that happen instantly, like me taking out a tailgater, which I should be able to. By law, they should pass it, and Michael Olson should be able to put a bullet in any tailgater's head. Because as God does, as he wiped out many, why should they be allowed to continuously torment me, harass me, and everything else? Truly. But this goes for anyone else. Why should I step out of work into a country that's given the most? And this is the point. When you're given the most, you have the greatest responsibility. And so all these people coming here must be told that America, as Michael Nedved said, the greatest country on God's green earth, given the most, you have a great responsibility, because there is great wealth here and opportunity to propel yourself both physically and mentally to levels unseen in any country in the world. They can't compete with us in Finland, Sweden. They have on a small scale what we have on a large scale. Do you know how many, let's see, physical, what is this called? Anyways, elite physical trainers. I mean, I interacted with elite, best in the world. My roommate, Eric, he's literally one of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the world. He worked for the Cleveland Indians. He worked for the University of Arizona. He worked for Chronos, which is a thing about projecting life. Chronos means in Greek time. And the guy from the University of Phoenix started it. He's big into cryogenics and life expansion. He cryogenically froze his dog. Yeah, he wanted to bring his dog back to life. He freezing him when we had a veterinary cure for the sickness that was killing his dog. He wants to bring his dog back to life, reanimating his dog. That's his plan, to reanimate his dog from cryogenics. So his dog died. He froze him, saving and preserving on his deathbed him. And he wanted to bring back his dog, reanimate his dog, and cure the disease, and allow his dog to continue to live. And it's no joke. He unbelievably loved his dog. This is not science. He did it because he's an incredible dog lover. I mean, his dog dying was a huge traumatic experience. You can read about it to him. And spending all that money to him to cryogenically preserve his dog and maybe one day be able to bring him back was more than worth it. And it wasn't for an experiment. It was because he was trying to bring his dog back because he didn't want his dog to die. Maybe later on in life, but his dog got sick and died prematurely. And he wanted to bring his dog back and give his dog a full life. And so, again, this is where veterinary science can come in, and the first thing we can reanimate is a hamster or a mice that dies of causes, whether it's they have rabies or anything else, and you cryogenically freeze it and preserve it, and then once you have a cure, you try to reanimate the animal. Just give it its natural life. That's all he wanted to do, is give the dog a fighting chance for his natural life. So he's big into this, and Eric worked for him and knows all the science that went into that. And they make custom pharmaceuticals. Everything they do is custom made. You go in, and Eric took his mom. He loves his mother. I met his mother. She's a school teacher. Now, she's fully Hispanic. His father was a white U.S. Marine. He died early. Me and Eric bonded over losing our fathers, too. Him and his brother Dan, the youngest major in military history. The youngest major in military history. Both Eric and Dan so loved their father, and they did. They loved their father. They went into the Marines. Both of them highly educated. Truly, Eric finished his master's with me. I don't know if he has his PhD, but he has more strength and conditioning designations than anyone I know. He runs the gamut. But the whole point is, well, personality-wise, me and Dan were best of friends, closer than me and Eric, because Dan's personality meshed better with me. But also, I've always had a huge crush on Eric's sister, who she's a award-winning reporter. Beautiful girl. But Eric loved his mother, paid for everything, took her up, and went her through and then custom made everything so her mother can be healthy and live a long life. And the kids stayed very connected with their mother, making sure their mother had engagement and was active and healthy. But they truly loved their mother and father. And when their father died prematurely, they mourned greatly. But these are people that I learned from. Eric hated Hispanics. Now, when I say that, you have to preface it. His mother's fully Hispanic. The preface is he hated the Hispanic gangbangers, the cholos. He hated them. Because that side of him, his father was a Marine, and he fought for this country. I forget what wars he fought in. And he raised them, and he loved them, and he mentored them to honor their country, and so on. And that's why they joined the military. But the thing is, he used to always talk about how they were bringing that side of him down. Excuse me. But I get this from white people. Since I've been a kid, I watched the civil rights movement, and white people are evil, and white people are doing this to blacks, and white people are doing this, and And I grew up with a Chinese family, which they were good to me. And there was a white guy who mischarged me at the store and found out they let me go because I wasn't stealing anything. But I didn't have anything to give to them, and I didn't think of it as a 6-year-old kid that, how to explain myself that I was innocent. And their 2 children told them that I was taken in for stealing. And they told me that our children can't be around the thief. Now, do you take this as a bad thing, or do you think these Chinese people are really good? I think really, really moral. Because they're so worried about their children growing up being affected negatively by some filthy, thieving piece of garbage. And so they said I could still come to the restaurant and everything, and they still waived my bill every time, but I stopped coming because of shame. And I understand shame, but it was false. And they gave me great praise as being the mentor for their 2 children, their male and female, because they watched me at the newspaper stand. They watched me as my table manners when I came in. It's the same thing Jennifer Kim, when I started dating her. What did she say to me? I want you to teach my younger brother and sister. I want you to mentor them. And she went through college and in the workplace, and she thought that I had great capabilities to mentor her younger brother and sister. I took them out to a fine Italian restaurant to teach them fine dining, how the utensils work and everything. And I did many more things to help mentor them. And she thought I had, and she went to school, she worked for a consulting firm, and she thought that I was an incredible mentor for her brother and sister. And who agreed? Her mother. And then on default, I started mentoring her mother. Truly, her mother, because I took Jen in. I talked to her about Section 162 expenses, necessary and ordinary deductions as a business, and many other things. And she works for a consulting firm. I took her the real estate class. I went over real estate structures, business structures. And what did her mother do? Her mother started following in footstep, and she started watching the nightly business report on WTTW, which was good. It was a business report, and it was very good on WTTW. I like how they do the show. There's the noon business hour that was on WBBM, and that was a very good. I used to listen to that at lunchtime. It was between him, that show, and Dennis Miller, because they were both on at the same time, but Dennis Miller went longer, so I listened to the noon business hour. But I met the girl who was one of the people on the show. It was a guy and a girl that ran the show. She used to be my regular customer at Joey's, where I bartended. And me and her were good, and we talked financials. And, she ran the show. But the whole point is, Jen's mother started becoming incredibly financially savvy. And Jen would tell me, my mother's doing this now, my mother's doing that. I helped her try to expand her dry cleaners. And I told her, when her mother was penny wise and dollar foolish, I told her, yes, I understand making the monthly, but also, did I run a light? I've never done that talking. But somebody went somehow. Anyways, So I don't know if I ran or not because I can't see back at the red light. So anyways, her mother, I told her with the dry cleaners she was wrong. And that Jen, and I told Jen, you should invest in your mother. Take some of your money, invest, take stock back, and help your mother expand. And I came up with all kinds of technology for her mother, and she didn't implement it. I came down with automatic systems to trigger when the laundry came in, to notify the client through text message. This is going back to 2002. There was a guy Lair was working with these automatic triggers. So you scan it into a POS system and it sends out a text. The POS system, the point of sale system, once you scan it, sends out the text to the client. So when you come in, it gets a barcode, and then you scan it again. And when you scan it, it comes back in. It sends out a text message. Your clothes are ready to be picked up. And it reminds them of the business hours and so on. Or, as I told Michael Kang, and Mrs. Kang should meet Mrs. Kim. Mrs. Kang owns a dry cleaning plant and has a store. And Mrs. Kim has a store and is very particular of how the dry cleaning plants treat her clothing. She's very studious. And then I set up my friend John Zeef, who was selling enzyme products to dry cleaners. And so he was going to get into the dry cleaners through some other guy, and I forget the guy he was working with, an Asian guy, but I was helping him through to get into the dry cleaning to sell enzyme cleaners. But anyways, these two ladies would be perfect together and incredibly hardworking. And Jimmy works hard, but her mother, as Yomei said, behind stronger mother. Well, her mother, Mrs. Kang, she is one hard-working lady. She earned everything, and things went south on deals, but that lady opened up Jimmy's store, supported Jimmy, even when she was having physical issues and that. She is just a very driven woman. And that's why I was proud to be around Jen's friends, because from Stella to Trina to Mia to Lisa to Na to Erica to all of them. And Erica got the 30 Under 30 award from Cranes. But all these girls were incredibly driven. And I was proud to call them my friend. And they didn't do anything unethical. They were very moral people. And when they dated, like Jane, she's another one. And when she dated, she got with Alex. And Alex is extremely moral. And Alex used to call out, he's Chinese. And he used to get pissed at the Chinese people that were freeloading on public health. That they come in their fur coats and their Mercedes, and they were stuffing the mattress. And why did he presume that? Because they were wearing a fur coat and driving a luxury car and taking public health. And he couldn't do anything about it. But he was pissed that they were bleeding the system dry because they were doing tax evasion. So, and they were buying these things, and that's why I talk about financial, that Asians, and I told Jimmy, my friend that owned Jimmy's Cafe, Jimmy Kang, so I told him, never. I said, there is ways we can do tax strategy, so not tax evasion, but tax tax sheltering that's legal. So you can time when you do tax strategy. So that's the point of everything. It's timing. When you put it into a Roth, you pay taxes now. When you put it into a traditional, you pay taxes later. And you're balancing how much tax you want to pay later to how much tax you want to pay today. And every year you should be changing between your Roth and your traditional 401k. And your advisor is supposed to be telling you based on income levels and deductions. And this year, projecting out the year, and you can do a recharacterization. You know what that is? When you move money, or a conversion, I should say. A recharacterization is when you move money into one, whether you move it from a Roth into a traditional, or move it from a traditional into a Roth and you put it back. So if you moved it from a Roth to a traditional because you want to take this deduction, and that's why you're doing it, you want a current year deduction. So you recharacterize it and you can recognize it. No, I'm sorry, backwards. You recharacterize it so you can take the deduction, the current year deduction from the Roth. So you're paying taxes and you don't want to pay taxes, so you move it from the Roth to the traditional so you can take the deduction. So that's part of end-of-year tax strategy. And I learned this at Vanguard, that wrote all the rules for the recharacterization and that, working with the IRS. Because the Roth was new when I got there, and it's been out for a little bit, but Vanguard with the IRS wrote the rules. Why did the IRS use Vanguard? Because of all the money. They had all these people putting money into IRAs, individual retirement accounts, huge, and rolling over 401ks. And so they had so much of it that it gave them exposure, and the IRS wanted to write the rules, so they needed a high volume situation where people put a lot of money into Roths, put them into traditional, recharacterize, and then they can watch the demographics, and they get the demographics of the people doing it, what income levels they are, and then they get from Vanguard, internally Vanguard knows, and they're doing it for this reason or that reason, but they never know the person. But Vanguard worked hand in hand with the IRS, so the IRS can get all the demographics. This person makes $100,000. This person makes $1 million. This person makes $10 million a year. They're recharacterizing, or they're, doing this, putting this amount of money into a Roth at this level, $1 million person putting whatever. So there's ways to, anyways, the backdoor Roth, it's called. But they wanted to work all these details out, and so they needed a high volume firm and one that's ethical and is willing to work with them. Now, the reason the relationship was also good, because the IRS had lots of money with Vanguard as well. So the people at the IRS, not because they were self-dealing, because they knew the ethics of Vanguard. And so they chose them based on ethics and volume, because that's why they put the plan there in the first place. So we used to have the SEC, the IRS, and all the regulatory organizations put their money with Vanguard because they were afraid of ethical problems. So Vanguard, if you don't know, in 1999, we had socially conscious funds. We rolled them out in 1999. And when we rolled them out, we looked at them and decided we don't need socially conscious funds. And you say, why is that? They said, this needs to be standard for all our funds, that all our funds has to have socially conscious. So they invest in things that are moral and ethical, that better the community, that don't hurt the community. So Vanguard made a decision in 1999 that every fund is socially conscious, and it only invests in things that better communities. It will only provide funds to things they deem as beneficial to the communities. So I don't know if we invested in truly alcohol or cigarette companies. I actually never saw them on our thing. So I don't know if any of our funds held them. But they decided that they would only invest in things that were socially beneficial to a community. It was building it. And think about this. Think about it from an economic standpoint. If you, as an organization like Vanguard, and you're controlling this amount of money, and the money benefits the community's financials are very stable, and the community grows through stability. And that means their funds do very well. They have low volatility and high systematic rates of positive return. So they figured out, and this is all studying when we launched socially conscious funds and we retired them, is because we figured out that it was better for the economics. Why do you think they're over something trillion now? Because they learned that they have to be highly moral. And being highly moral, all the money flowed to them because people didn't want problems either. They weren't in to get tied up in a scandal with investing Vanguard. Management wasn't going to be in a scandal. Management wasn't illegally bidding or doing anything. Vanguard's never been in any scandal, ever. And they operate. Why do you think I work for them? And I truly believed in them, and I was part of the Vanguard alumni group. And so I believed in the ethics. I believed in how they were handling things. We launched our ETFs called Vipers when I was there. I watched us on the brokerage side and everything. I moved through every department, literally. But the whole point I'm telling you is they learned that it was positive. So when you invest in things that destroy a community, you end up destroying yourself. And so they realized that they could only invest in things that better the community. If not, they were going to have serious problems across hundreds of funds. At that time, we had 100 and something mutual funds. And so they realized it would be very devastating if every fund wasn't socially conscious and morally driven. And so they look at the board of directors, they look at the company, they look at the products they produce, and they must be socially positive. And if they're not socially positive, they tend to stay away from it. So it's kind of like the Catholic fund. It's the same thing. Ave Maria fund that Lou Holtz is on and some others, but it has the same standard. If it's not socially positive and building things positively, they stay away from it. Like, do you know the guy who invented dynamite? He he had a heart of hearts and realized that he created something that was being used for wickedness. And he took all his money and repented. He repented. All the money that he earned from producing dynamite, he decided it is an Oppenheimer situation. But I'll put the link on this YouTube video about the guy who invented dynamite in his philosophical pursuit after he saw everything that was happening and it wasn't used the way he thought. And this is why we have patents and everything, because it's like nuclear. We allowed the creation of nuclear to get out of our control, and we ran into an arms race with nuclear weapons all over the place because we didn't protect it correctly. And so Pakistan, India, and all these, we taught the nuclear physicists and so on and so forth, and we trained all these people, and we ran into a problem of nuclear arms proliferation. Now, Russia did take some stuff from us, but Russia, they got it from the Germans as we got it from the Germans. The Germans were working on a nuclear bomb long before we were. And they were way ahead of us. They got the first jet fighter, they had the first rocket, and they were building a nuclear bomb. The thing that stopped them is because we were able to smuggle out a lot of their scientists. And so the Germans had a great brain drain because of how they were treating people. These people left, and it really slowed their ability to push forward their nuclear program. But it was originally started when things were more copacetic, and they were way ahead of us. They had the physicists, they had everything, and they were already way before we even knew about nuclear bomb. We didn't even know about it until it was disclosed to us. But what happened when World War II was coming to a close, it was a race to capture German scientists. And they were flooding over, but the Russians, they sped up everything to get into Berlin, and as much of Berlin as we could. And the reason that they were able to take Berlin before us, and the Germans surrendered to us. Unlike the Japanese, different situation, the Germans didn't want to go with the Soviet Union. They wanted to go with the United States. So when it came up to a situation of fighting on, the Germans just started surrendering because they knew the Russians were coming up on the other side, and the Russians were racing fiercely. Stalin was racing fiercely to get in to capture as much technology as possible. And what happened with Eisenhower, and this is a learning experience, he had to deal with Monty and all of them, who was going to go in here, or Patton, and dealing with egos. And he had to, massage the talent, but in turn, what happened? It slowed down our advancement. The Germans, once cornered, would just willingly surrender to us, and we were moving through faster, and we could have captured all of Berlin in that, literally all of Germany. Truly. But the Eastern Bloc came out because Eisenhower kept on trying to, pamper these people with their mentality, instead of saying, it's not about you, it's about accomplishing the mission. And if your ego gets in the way of accomplishing the mission, then I need to get rid of you. You're in it to accomplish the mission, and your work will speak for itself. So if you get there, fine. But what did we wait for? De Gaulle to go into France to give the French people, so he looked victorious and everything else? That was wrong. Look through it. It was wrong. Yeah, the French needed some morale boost, but they already got it from getting freed from the Germans. We should have never done that. That was totally wrong. And that allowed us to sit back and wait and then allow them to go in and do their hurrah, rah, rah, rah. And then it allowed the Germans to what? What? To reboot. That's why you got the Battle of the Bulge. Because he constantly dealing with these personalities and slowing down Patton or stopping the advancement, let this person go into this town and then let that person go into this town. And what happens? We gave all of Eastern Europe to Russia. We would have went through Germany, went into Eastern Europe, and literally met Russia much further into Eastern Europe, maybe Romania or something else, but they wouldn't have advanced as far because the Germans on the other side, they were fighting to the death. They weren't really surrendering to the Russians. They were freezing to death, starving to death, but they weren't going to surrender. And they were fighting to the death. And hence, we could have pushed all the way through, and I think of all the lives, the millions upon millions upon millions of lives that got destroyed. And I think about we went into the arms race and the horrible things that went on because of it. And I think about all of that and managing these people's egos. God doesn't care about their egos. Either they're with God or they're against. And if your ego gets in the way, you die forever. And that's the point about humbling before God. And if you're not willing to humble, you burn. So if your ego gets in the way of me, you perish forever. So I keep on telling you, what you're doing with me is totally wrong. And if you don't repent and humble yourself before me, you're going to burn. And that's your choice. But as God sees your arrogance in what you do with me, you're going to be condemned. Impoverishing me, giving me diseases, giving me loneliness and heartache and all these, you're going to be put to waste. Either you burn down or you perish forever. So, there is no choice. It's not a choice. You destroy these individuals, crush their egos, break them to remold them. And it says it in many of the songs. Softly broken or broken brutally. But either way, broken. And I went up doing this my whole life. Since I've been a child. Breaking people and remolding them. So, you have to understand the horrors. It's like Eisenhower and the choice with MacArthur in Korea. I disagreed. Even Patton wanted to take it to the Russians. And we fully had the ability to run over the Russians. Russia would have been on an island with no partners. We had Australia, we had Great Britain, we had all of them, French, you name it, on our side. And we could have rolled into Russia and ended it. But we chose not to. We chose not to with Korea. We could at least went all the way to the Chinese border. Douglas wanted to go in and just invade China and put an end to it, which we could have. But it's always the weak-willed American. And this is what I found out, that America lost its tenacity and is always weak-willed, making very bad decisions, like pulling out of Vietnam. We should have seen what happened in South Korea and North Korea when we left the troops there. What happened? They didn't break the treaty. What happened in Vietnam? We decided to pull out totally. We could have set up a demilitarized zone between South and North Vietnam. Instead, all those people died, and you're talking millions of lives. You got put to waste. And then I wrote Obama on this, and he doesn't understand this, but this is what I grew up doing and studying. And I told him not to pull the troops out of the Middle East. When you go in, you can never come out. And what happens? He pulls them out, and we get Al Qaeda and the Taliban and ISIS and Khmer Rouge, and it just went on in the explosion in terrorist organizations. And we failed to do the rebuilding, and we failed to do the integration like we did in the Japanese and Germany, reintegrating the troops, weeding out the Nazis and certain people that wouldn't be broken, we had to dispose of. We either put them in a camp for the rest of jail for the rest of their life, or we executed them. But we cut them off also from all forms of communication. So they couldn't interact or communicate. They were in solitary in that way. And that was a purpose. So they couldn't start unearthing us from underneath. We did this in Japan and Germany. And then we reintegrated all the troops and got them good jobs and rebuilt their economies and everything else, and they became great friends of ours. But we couldn't expose them. That's why I hated Charles Manson being alive. And him writing and all these women pen pals, and then him on the TV shows and everything else. His ideology, and I disagreed with it. And there's some people that are a threat. So if you're going to keep them alive, he can't be doing interviews with the press. He can't have pen pals and communicating with outside people and doing this propaganda. So I disagree with, and the government here, these people are not historians and study this and understand it and understand where things worked and where they didn't. But I've been doing this my whole life. So I wrote for 8 straight years to Biden and Obama about things I disagreed with. The TPP I agreed with. Why? Because the Chinese were being unfair. Not to stop Chinese investment, to stop Chinese from taking advantage of poorer economies like Mongolia on that and forcing them to be fair and equitable in trade deals. Because what they were doing was taking advantage of people's poverty, their thirst for capital. And they were basically underpaying them for resources. Mongolia stopped the dam project because they thought their people were being greatly taken advantage. And this is what we call fair trade. See, Obama wasn't doing it for that reason per se, but I was for it because it would have had that end result. Forcing China to be fair with their lending agreements and their economic agreements and their trade agreements with other countries. As we've been fair with China. We haven't extorted China. And we've been fair with our agreements to them. And it's been very beneficial. And Great Britain was very fair. They turned over everything in Hong Kong, a thriving economy that poured incredible amounts of money into mainland China from Hong Kong. Hong Kong became a serious building block for wealth. Hong Kong built Shanghai. Not Shanghai building Hong Kong. Hong Kong built Shanghai. And that economic system that the British turned over after their lease expired, which, if them, I would have extended. But again, they turned it over and it funded the explosion in mainland China from the economic wealth of Hong Kong to trickle into mainland China. And that's why they want control over Hong Kong, the Chinese. And the agreement is that the Hong Kong government would be sovereign to the Chinese government. That was the agreement. It is one China, not one government. And that Hong Kong would maintain an independent government, separate. So Hong Kong would govern their people independently of mainland China. But economically, like in the European Union, France governs their people, Germany governs their people, but in the EU, they have an economic alignment for trade benefits. And that was the deal between China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong is literally an independent nation. And that's why China has been trying to take over Taiwan and funding candidates and everything else, trying to move through the government to take over leadership in Taiwan. And once they take over leadership, then they've been doing the same in Hong Kong. Leadership will choose to merge with China, and they would replace their governments fully. And they would be just like Singapore or anywhere else, run by the Chinese federal government. Taiwan's federal government is supposed to be independent of China. Hong Kong's federal government is supposed to be independent of China. They can have economic trade like the EU, but they have sovereignty from China. They're not one China. They have economic benefits, and each government needs to negotiate with China independently for their benefit. And the Chinese for their benefit with Hong Kong, for their benefit with Taiwan. I am not anti-Chinese, but they were being unfair. And so if they're going to work through and be a global leader, and as my partner warned me, I went into Chinatown, and I was in, again, an office in Chinatown, and my partner David worked for several Chinese banks consulting, and he warned me heavily that they were not fair. They're new Christians, and they do not know fairness. And he warned me to be very careful because they'll exploit me, exploit my generosity, exploit my favorness. I like Chinese people because they were good to me when I was young. And I watched over the Chinese store. My stand was right outside. They never had a problem. Their kids never had a problem. Their business never had a problem. And I watched over them the whole time I was in that neighborhood until I moved out in the end of 7th grade. But they never had any problems in the community. So, believe me, even when I stopped going in, I was still watching over and caring for them. So, in turn, he warned me, and he was worried that they wouldn't be fair to me. And I still went in, as I took Jimmy King there. He's Korean and he used to eat there. But I wanted to do a consulting thing, going in and consulting on Chinese restaurants and teaching them how to turn it into a true business and refining their practices and everything. But I didn't expect that my thing would collapse my business and that I would be pushed into starvation. That changed everything. Before, I had enough to meet my needs and I was gathering more wealth, but I still had enough to meet needs, and so I could be beneficial in some ways. Even when I was starving before, I could still be beneficial because I was able to work out of it, and I had the light at the end of the tunnel as I was moving up, finishing college, then moving through all my designations and certifications, and then going into grad school, that it was just getting better, and it was easy for me to be charitable in that way. But all of a sudden, you bled me and continue to bleed me and beat me and torture me. And I've been through all of that, but there was always a light at the end of the tunnel I could grab onto. I had lots of women trying to court me. Yeah, lots of women that believed in me, that were actively courting me. So I had all this possibility. So even in the negative, I had all these bright lights that I could put my hand on, like Gene. I used to go every year when I moved to NCPC, that Jean would save a seat in the church next to me for me. Every time I came in, she would wave me down and have me sit right next to her. And every time, we never schedule it. I just show up and she would stand up and she'd see me come in, and she was looking for me every single time. And she would wave me down and then have me sit next to her, and she'd be happy and friendly and, I mean, super great to me. It's like Glow, Brad's wife. She did the same thing. She was super good to me. She always worried about, like, if things were not going right, meaning she noticed that I was lonely or something, she would order Chad to come over and talk to me, or she would come over, or she would introduce me to people. But she was worried about making sure that I was fitting in correctly, that I wasn't isolated and left alone. Truly. And I can't think about it, because if I think about her for too long, I start crying too heavily. But she was super good to me. Even going through her own challenges, as I was going through mine, she was super good to me. But Jean, like when I left small group for periods of time, Simon asked me to come back a little bit, but Jean, she really, really put an effort in getting me to come back consistently to small group, and I did. And so all these things that we used to talk and email and like just get along, and sometimes she was distant and I couldn't understand, but most of the time I thought it was going to go really well. Just like Julie Cho. She for years and years trying to get me to come over to this other church. And I didn't leave until Brad told me when he was leaving that it was best that I leave NCPC. My intention was staying, but Brad told me that I had no hope of a future girlfriend at NCPC. And when he told me, I asked him, I said, do you think I'm here for God, but I need a girl? And do you think that I'm going to find one in the congregation. And he said to me, I don't think you're going to find a girl for you at NCPC. So it'd be better that you find another church. Okay. And that's how I went over to Julie, who, again, I've always had a crush on, huge, but I wasn't moving because I was trying to, go deeper in the church, and I was giving more each year to NCPC. Every year, as I made more money, I was increasing my tithing to NCPC, which became NCC, which I disagreed with. But anyways, so I moved, and Julie Cho said, why now? And I didn't explain this to her as I'm explaining to you. And it was because of what Brad told me. And I have a deep connection with Julie. And so I kept my small group, and I had the connection with Gene. And then I added a physical connection with Julie on a regular basis. And me and Julie used to go to lunch and talk about church, and sat on Mercy Committee and did all these things together. And now I had Gene, now I had Julie. And then getting into Alice and Ann, I used to go out to lunch and do a bunch of things with Ann Fan all the time, this other girl. And so even if I didn't have exactly the girlfriend I wanted, moving through between these three girls in particular, Ann Fan, Julie Cho, and Jean, at least I had this female companionship that was deep, and I could talk to them about different things, and but I've lost all of them now. I didn't expect that to happen. But the whole point I'm telling you is the reasons why I did what I did. And so I end up in these situations, and I think it's better, and I don't understand, again, how I ended up in this situation of, again, being back in extreme poverty. It boggles my mind. But again, getting back to the Chinese and everything else, that's why I did what I did, writing to Obama and everything, understanding, trying to get the Chinese to be fair. And sometimes you stand up through these agreements like the TPP, which at times that wasn't beneficial to us. In some of those agreements, it wasn't beneficial. It was us taking on the chin. Now the benefits were down the road. The benefits were nowhere in the current. We were allowing them to import more to the U.S., and we weren't importing more to them. And so the balance of trade was in their favor. But what is that? And I agreed with this, and I don't know who was running, Alan Goolsbee from the University of Chicago. I don't know who was leading the agenda, but it was a way to build those countries. So sometimes when you make trade agreements, you make them against the United States. Not in the benefit of the United States. This is a loss leader. Like grocery stores used to sell the milk for a loss so they can sell other items on the shelf. And that leads to, and you think loss leader, no, we don't get the direct commodities. We lose in the commodity game. We get the intellectual property. That leads to Deloitte, Ernst & Young, KPMG, all the law firms, McGuire Woods, many of the colleges, University of Chicago and that do education abroad. We get it from the intellectual properties that helps raise that economy. And then as they build wealth, in turn, we'll start getting better commodity purchasing because they will demand more as a household. And so we lose on the front end to gain on the back end. And we're not a wolf in sheep's clothing. We're building the economy. We're moving their people out of poverty. And then in turn, we reap benefits from the good works. And that's what the Bible tells you, the fruit of your labor. And so you reap the benefits from the fruit of your labor. So you're not the wolf in sheep's clothing. You want their economy to build, and you want to give them free will, and they get to make a choice on who they do business with in the future. You don't strong arm them if they choose not to do business in certain ways or business with us. Well, then that's something we learn from. But it's up to their choice. We give their thing free will, and they have to choose us freely. We don't force anyone to do business with us. And so, again, I agreed with the TPP. And there are things like he did Obamacare with the Affordable Care Act, with trying to solve infertility and get the birth rate up of American citizens. And I agreed with that. And also I agreed with him digitizing all the medical records and getting that so they can do demographic studies and that. So Cook County Department of Health can work with artificial intelligence and grab the medical records, which they have full legal right to do demographic studies. But they have to be digitized, and they have to have access through a porthole to every doctor's office and hospital within Cook County to see what types of cases are coming in and how the population is trending. Is there more cancer? Is there more diabetes? Is there more miscarriages or stillbirths or, arthritis or polio or influenza or whatever? And so they can gather the demographic information so lawmakers can figure out how they can direct things correctly within a society. Do we need to take, stress off? We have too many stress-related breakdowns. And so we have to change traffic patterns. We have to change timing at traffic lights. We have to do these things. We got to improve our less salt. And we must create a hybrid because there's too much acid from the salting of the streets, and it's killing the shrubs and the grass and putting too much, in the atmosphere that's causing lungs or respiratory or allergies or whatever it be. But I agreed with him doing that. And then when the local government has their own health panel and they work with the county and they work together, and then the counties share with the state, because the state is an aggregate. And this is why we do it. The local government, like City of Chicago, is bigger. You have aldermen. Even in Buffalo Grove, you have committeemen. And they work certain areas, and they understand their demographics and their needs, and then they come into power working with the mayor to create a thriving community. But they take all that information and give it into the county. So the county can get policies that benefit each local community and figure out the trade-offs where they give more to one community than another community based on certain factors. And then the counties come together and give all the information to the state government. And the state government funnels down to the counties funnel down their programs to the local government. So the state government is supposed to be doing programs only at the county level, not at the local level. And so you get the local Department of Health, the county Department of Health, and the state Department of Health. And the state Department of Health takes all the aggregate data from the counties. And then they get it, and that goes into the state Congress. And they can make things for their congressional districts. we're talking state Congress people. And then the Senate is broken, the state's broken 50-50. 2 senators, but more in the House of Representatives. And they get their data. Now, their data is more complicated because the counties and the lines are not, and this is a serious problem, is that the congressional districts don't follow traditional county lines. And so you can have a congressman that's representing Cook County, Lake County, and DuPage County, but they cut off in different areas, so they only represent this much of Lake County or this much of DuPage or this much of Cook. And so you have to subdivide the data to give the federal congressmen their information. Now, it's easier for the president and the executive branch because they just take it straight from the state government. They take the aggregate data. So Trump and his cabinet get the data directly from the state government, and so they can see what's going on in each of the 50 states. They can look from the state level to the county level to each individual counties to the local level. And it's not supposed to be used for politics. It's supposed to be used to solve problems. Driving from solving problems is your reason in office. Not using it as political further, but your nature must be to solve problems, and you stay in office by solving problems and expanding the economy positively. And I learned this at Senator McCain. We had the political side and our congressional office or constituency office, and we can't do anything with politics. Now, we fed them certain information with callers and so on that called in, and we tell them that's a campaign issue, and you have to work on the political side to get that initiative move forward. And so we would give them information based on our experiences, so the political side knew what was going on, but our essence was apolitical, not political. Our office operated for Democratic, Republican, Libertarian. It didn't matter party affiliation. And we didn't ask party affiliation. We didn't care what party you're affiliated. We helped Democrats the same as we helped Republicans and so on if they had issues. It was about solving issues with law enforcement or any government agency. We didn't care about a party affiliation. That is not what we were funded for. We were this autonomous unit. We can give to the political side, but we can't be political. And so we just give them experience. And so we can give them demographic information. That it's so they can make informed decisions based on what's going on with the constituency. So they have more data, and that's why the masses are asses, because they don't have the information. They're very much not in the know. And they make decisions not. And the political side is supposed to inform them, and that's why we have fact check and all that, so they get informed right of the issues. And that's why we elect leaders, because those leaders have transparency. And the reason why we don't give transparency, because corporations need to derive their own, because we're a competitive economy. So we give the U.S. Census and we give other data like the Fed puts out in that, but it goes out to everybody. And it's their ability to interpret the data and apply the data correctly is what we do. And so we don't get into whether we favor Pfizer over, say, some French pharmaceutical firm. if they're incorporated in America, they have the same right. Like Toyota of Japan is now Toyota of America. They incorporate it, like Honda of America. They have full rights to that information. That's why they incorporate in the United States. Because once they incorporate, they have rights to a competitive playing field. But if they don't incorporate and they work through an intermediary, that intermediary, an importer, they're incorporated in the United States. So say you're mezcal and you're importing from Mexico. Well, Chicago Beverage Systems, say, I'm just giving an example, they're importing the mezcal. They become the intermediary, and they do the demographics, and they take it and they work with mezcal to help them understand the market and to penetrate the market better. So who they choose as a partner, and they're free to choose whoever they want as a partner, per se, and the partner is free to choose them. But the intermediary you choose has certain skills and gifts, and you work with those abilities. That was a choice by your firm, who you were going to, like KLM partnering up with, I think, United Airlines, or was it American? I keep on forgetting. But the whole point is they chose them as a strategic partner. And so American or United, who had their partner up, can give them demographics of how many flights they got going out and so on, and what destinations they're choosing, and how many of them will transfer over the KLM on KLM flights within Europe. Because KLM flew me to Africa, but we first flew into Amsterdam, and then we changed from the American airline to KLM, who was their strategic, and we went from Amsterdam into Ghana. And then from back, KLM from Ghana back to Europe, to Amsterdam, from Amsterdam on the American carrier into the United States. But also, when we get off, we could have done short hops from KLM into whatever, or maybe you choose British Airways. Now, they have certain amount of gates here, but they don't have a lot of gates. And so they get aggregate and they get information, demographic information, that's much larger. Now, British Airlines can have offices here and that, but they don't have a lot of gates, so they don't get a lot of demographic, but they do have access to the census and other things. But a lot of times they willingly choose to partner up with another airline, a domestic carrier. Because why? Resources. Demographic information, just as United or American chose KLM because they get greater demographic information from Europe. And so it helps them to fine-tune their airlines to make it more appealing to Europeans. They have some information from their own demographics, but KLM is a bigger player in Europe. And so they grab more demographics from KLM that helps fine-tune American or United. I don't know which is the partner. But that's how it's supposed to go. So they can choose a distributorship, and that's their partner, and that partner is giving them more demographics, more detailed information than they can get as a foreign corporation. And it's supposed to be that way, that they can't get access as a foreign corporation to some certain domestic information because they're not incorporated in the United States. One, it's for national security. Number two, it's to force partnerships in a way that either they incorporate in the United States and they set up a wholly owned subsidiary, Mexican mezcal of the United States, and they set up a corporation in the United States, and that gives us jurisdiction over the information. Or they work through a distributorship, and we have jurisdiction over the information through the distributorship, which is an American corporation. So if they're just an importer, meaning they stay as a foreign entity, then they work with their distributorship for information, but they don't have direct access to the same information as American corporations. Nor should American corporations have it in Europe or any other country the same. And this creates trade agreements and free trade zones and so on, but they're still working with demographic information. Just because there's no duties on trade, there is still intellectual capital. And how is it shared and who is it shared with? Because when you incorporate in the United States, you pay more fees and taxes and other things. When you work through an intermediary, you might have very little trade with the United States, and they're trying to expand the market, but again, you don't get really that much information because they're not going to invest that much. You're very small. They dedicate a certain amount to you. But as you grow and become a bigger revenue driver for them, if your product becomes popular, then they want to give you better demographic information in that, so you can fine-tune things like the labels and the bottle and maybe the taste or smell and so on, so it can penetrate deeper. But it's like anything, they're making a trade-off on how much they want to invest. And that means also intellectual capital that they have access to, which you don't as a foreign entity. So these are things that Chinese corporations have that American corporations don't when they do business in China. And this is how you foster them to work through intermediaries called wholesalers, or form a partnership with an existing entity like, say, Budweiser. And so you form a partnership with a corporation, and Budweiser distributes you product. Instead of going with a wholesaler who has many products, like Chicago Beverage has Miller Lite and many other products, you choose to partner up with a specific. And so you want more focus from them. But it's a trade-off. And this is how things are supposed to work globally. That it's driven through necessity. And they have to understand they have a right to their information, and it's proprietary to their country. And how we do trade and how much they allow us access into information is up to them. That's their sovereignty. And so we set up these things and exchanges back and forth, and we only do things through satellite, and this is governed through the UN for protection. We only get that information legally is for protection. Protecting us against first strikes, protecting us against adverse military action against us. But the only reason that we're allowed this information is that we're ethical and moral, and we sit on the Security Council as a permanent member, allowing us to gather this information and fly over North Korea, China, the Soviet Union. And so we can gather this information as we are deemed moral and ethical. But then again, China sits on there, and so does the Soviet Union in that. And this causes us a problem with the United Nations. If they're fighting a battle in the Ukraine, they can't be on the Security Council. If their war is considered unjust, they cannot sit on the United Nations Security Council and must be removed. Either temporarily blocked out, like Russia would be temporarily blocked out from the Security Council, or they would be permanently removed because their violation was so grave that they're permanently removed from the Security Council. Doesn't mean they can't be back on it as a temporary member sometime in the future, but they're no longer a permanent member because they did such a grave violation that they can't be trusted with international security, and so their satellites are not allowed to fly over certain countries. They're not allowed to grab global information because they cannot be trusted. And that is still airspace. And so the United Nations puts a ban on the path of their satellites and can actively remove them from space. Oh yeah, through the United Nations and the Peacekeeping Task Force, they can actively remove the satellites from space. That they have no right to fly over these countries and have no right to the information. And so they can go up there and actively grab the satellites, bring them down, go through the information, and then return the satellites to them and any information that is not in violation. But the satellites removed from space. So you have to have approval of the United Nations working with the Security Council, and the only reason you would be able to fly over the things that you're governed for a specific thing, like you can have telecommunication satellites, but they're non-military, meaning you're not trying to tap into communications. And this is what the Security Council of the United Nations is supposed to do. So who has right matters. Who sits on as permanent members of the UN Security Council matters. And we need to work these things out, and Russia needs to be removed temporarily, and if they're found to have grave violations, permanently. Because they can't fly satellites, and those Russian satellites would have to be removed. And that's where you have the European Union and everybody else. Well, Russia can be put on an island and forced to comply. And that's why we have Patriot missile systems. We share technology with our NATO allies and so on. So if they think of doing something retaliatory, they can be taken out right over Russian airspace. And who did they pollute and kill? They killed their own people, if need be. So again, things need to be established correctly. And so we have to work through these things, and Russia needs to be removed from the UN Security Council. They can't have a vote. And if they're fined, as I said, as a grave violation, then they're pulled out as a permanent member and can only come back as a temporary member. And they're rotated in like anyone else. They have to have votes and go through this moral premise and everything else. And all the other countries are voting, and then they can be a temporary member just for a period of time, and then they're removed. And so we have to do these things and set up things moving forward correctly. But I'm going to leave this video here.